After she knocked me out with a club, I woke up to find myself loosely tied to a chair while she stood there in stockings and heels, laughing with a flicker of madness in her eyes. She whispered that if only I hadn't shown up at the apartment, she could have kept up the act and stayed by my side forever. I suddenly flexed my muscles and snapped the ropes, pulling her straight into my lap while whispering in her ear. I told her I remembered every single thing, Mrs. Evans, and now it was my turn to punish her, because I was the one she had truly driven insane over the last decade. I have completely lost 10 years of my life. I woke up to the shocking reality that my high school frenemy, the undisputed Queen Bee, is now my wife. Not only am I married to Olivia Miller, but we apparently have 2 children together. This feels like a total nightmare that I cannot wake up from. I heard someone mention that Mr. Evans was out partying again, and when my vision cleared, I was surrounded by people dancing way too close for comfort. The neon lights were blindingly bright, and the bass from the speakers made my ears throb with pain. The air was thick with the smell of cigarettes and stale booze, making my head feel like it was about to split open. My last clear memory was ditching after-school detention to sneak off to the arcade with my buddies for a gaming marathon. Somehow, I opened my eyes, and the arcade had transformed into a high-end nightclub. I have no idea what is going on, and I desperately need someone to explain this madness to me. While I was struggling to make sense of the situation, the phone in my pocket started vibrating incessantly. I muttered about how annoying it was and wondered why a guy couldn't just have some peace for once. I pulled the device out and froze when I saw the caller ID, because the word wife was staring back at me in bold letters. I wondered what kind of sick joke this was supposed to be since I was still just a high school student. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, so I swiped the screen to answer the call. A cold and merciless female voice erupted from the speaker, telling me I had exactly 10 minutes to get home. She warned that if I was late, she would make sure I spent the rest of my life in total regret. The voice sounded both familiar and hauntingly distant, so I cautiously asked if it was really Olivia Miller on the line. She snapped back, asking if I'd seriously forgotten my own wife already. Even though I was confused, she was still my high school frenemy, so I refused to back down and asked who gave her permission to use that title. I demanded that Olivia Miller explain exactly what she was talking about. She told me she had heard enough and that I should just wait for her because this was far from over. She slammed the phone down, leaving me to snort in annoyance and wonder what kind of crazy pill she had taken to act this way. Half an hour later, a scantily clad pole dancer was swaying her hips and leaning right against me. Watching her move like that was enough to make any guy lightheaded with excitement. I found myself thinking that if this was all just a dream, I might actually prefer to stay asleep forever. Suddenly, a heavy boot slammed into my backside, nearly sending me face first into the dancer's lap. I whirled around in a rage, only to lock eyes with a gaze that was cold enough to freeze over. It was Olivia Miller, but she looked nothing like the innocent and haughty campus queen I remembered from my high school days. Her makeup was flawless and perfectly set, featuring sharp eyeliner and perfectly blended shadow. She was wearing a pair of sky-high stilettos that seemed to make the very floorboards tremble with every step she took. If our old homeroom teacher, the woman we nicknamed the Dragon Lady, Mrs. Peterson, saw her like this, she would have called her parents to the school immediately. I thought to myself that even if she was the top student in our grade, she shouldn't be acting this wild. She was wearing a professional business suit and heels, which felt completely wrong for a high school girl to be wearing. I wondered if the studious Olivia, who only cared about her grades, had finally entered a rebellious phase that was absolutely off the charts. Judging by her outfit, I assumed her boyfriend must be some kind of low-life scumbag. I decided right then that if I ever caught the guy, I would tear him limb from limb for even looking at her. It made me furious that anyone would dare lay a hand on Olivia Miller, but looking in her dark eyes only made me feel more annoyed and strangely confused. I complained about her kicking me and reminded her that those heels actually hurt quite a bit. Olivia was clearly fuming with rage, but she suddenly redirected all of that anger toward the dancer standing next to me. She demanded to know if the woman had been rubbing herself all over me just a moment ago. The dancer's face turned pale with fear, and she immediately looked at the floor without saying a single word. In the blink of an eye, Olivia raised her hand and delivered 2 sharp slaps across the woman's face. She called her a shameless woman for trying to seduce her husband and asked if she was looking for a fight. The dancer's hair was a complete mess as she stood there shaking uncontrollably from the shock. Within seconds, every single person in the club had their eyes glued to our little scene. The nightclub manager came rushing over with several large security guards in tow. I instinctively tensed my muscles because I knew things were about to get very ugly. I worried that if they called the police, Olivia might actually get arrested and taken away in handcuffs. A criminal record would absolutely ruin her chances of getting into a good college this year. She had started a fight in someone else's establishment, and since the manager had a reputation to protect, he couldn't just let it slide. I silently prayed that we could just throw some money at the problem to make it go away, quietly. If that didn't work, I was prepared to drop my father's name to intimidate them and hopefully settle the situation. I leaned in and tugged on Olivia's sleeve, whispering that she had been way too impulsive and should just apologize to the manager so we could get out of there. Instead of listening, Olivia's brow furrowed even deeper as she shot me an incredibly annoyed glare. She told me to shut up and promised to deal with me properly once we were back at the house. I was completely baffled because I had no intention of going home with her, and I had never seen her act this way in my entire life. One moment, she was calling me her husband, and the next she was threatening to settle the score at home. She had always been the untouchable ice queen of our high school, so her sudden aggressive behavior and clinging to me made zero sense. I leaned in closer to see if I could catch the scent of alcohol on her breath, but she didn't smell like she had been drinking at all. Having grown up together, seeing her act this crazy made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. I eventually shook my head and told her it wasn't appropriate for me to go to her house in the middle of the night. I suggested that we should just get our friends together after school tomorrow instead, so we could all hang out and catch up properly. Olivia just stood there looking at me as if I had completely lost my mind or sustained a serious head injury. Right then, the nightclub manager swaggered over with his thugs and demanded to know who was stupid enough to lay a hand on his girl, Lexi. Olivia didn't blink as she answered him in a voice that was as sharp and cold as a surgical blade. As soon as the manager got a good look at Olivia's face, his entire demeanor did a complete 180-degree turn. He started bowing and scraping, calling her Miss Miller and saying what an absolute honor it was to have her at his club. He grabbed Lexi by the arm and forced her to join him in offering a frantic string of apologies to Olivia. Olivia didn't even acknowledge their existence as she reached out and grabbed my hand to drag me out of the club. At my core, I was still just a high school kid at that age where a girl's touch makes your heart race. Having her hold my hand so firmly like that made my face feel incredibly hot and my pulse skyrocket. If everyone at school didn't already know that we were bitter frenemies, I might have actually thought I was falling for her. The car pulled up in front of my house a few minutes later, and I sat there in total shock as my brain struggled to process everything. When Olivia said she was taking me home, I realized with a jolt that she actually meant my own house. She kept calling me her husband while refusing to let go of my hand for even a second. I knew that if my parents caught me coming home like this with a girl, they would absolutely skin me alive. I was still stuck in a daze when Olivia led me through the front door and straight into the main living room. A few new household staff members were working in the foyer, and they didn't seem surprised at all to see her holding my hand. They all bowed in unison and greeted us as Mr. Evans and Mrs. Evans. I could understand them calling me Mr. Evans, but I had no clue where this Mrs. Evans title was coming from. Olivia turned to one of the nannies and asked how Leo was doing. The woman respectfully informed her that the boy had taken his fever medication and was finally fast asleep. I was taken aback and asked if Leo was her dog, mentioning that it was actually a pretty classy name for a pet. Olivia shot me a furious look and demanded to know what was wrong with me today. I nearly laughed in her face and told her that she was the one acting strange by calling me her husband and dragging me to my own house. I looked her in the eye and asked her what her endgame was in all of this. A look of deep sadness suddenly washed over her face as she asked me what I thought she wanted. She explained that Leo had a fever and had been crying for his father all night, leaving her with no idea what to do. She accused me of abandoning the company and the house just to spend my days drinking and chasing women, asking if I was even ashamed of what people were saying about me. I stood there completely frozen to the spot while the nanny looked at Olivia with pure pity as if she were the most wronged woman on earth. I swallowed hard and tried to keep my voice steady as I spoke. I asked her why she came to me just because some kid named Leo wanted his dad, since I wasn't about to play father to a child I didn't even know. Before I could even finish my sentence, Olivia swung her hand and slapped me across the face with everything she had. A stinging pain immediately radiated across my cheek because she clearly hadn't held back at all. I lost my temper instantly and yelled at her, asking if she had gone completely insane. Right at that moment, a little girl in pajamas came running down the stairs and asked if mom and dad were fighting again. She mentioned that her teacher told her families should be happy and shouldn't fight all the time. She looked exactly like a porcelain doll, and her big watery eyes were fixed on me as if she were demanding that I apologize to Olivia. I knelt down and couldn't resist pinching her cheeks, jokingly asking if she was Leo and telling her she was much cuter than her mother used to be. The little girl immediately put her hands on her hips and stomped her foot in frustration. She yelled that her name was Lily and that Leo was her brother, crying about how I could forget the names I had picked out myself. I looked up and immediately met Olivia's sharp, judgmental gaze, so I just gave her a sheepish grin. I told her the kid was making things up because there was no way I had ever given her a name. Lily looked absolutely devastated by my words, and tears started streaming down her face as she sobbed to her mother that I didn't love her anymore. Olivia picked the girl up and held her close, her jaw set in a tight line as she asked if I was really going to disown my own daughter. My anger flared up again, and I snapped at her, demanding to know what her game was. I reminded her that I was just a high school kid and that it was impossible for me to have a daughter this old. Olivia gave a cold, humorless laugh and asked me if I was serious about being a high schooler. She told me that I would be turning 30 after the new year and asked if I really thought I was still some 17-year-old kid. I was completely floored by the news and stammered out a question, asking if I was truly almost 30 years old. The nanny standing nearby timidly added that my 30th birthday was only 2 months away. She also reminded me that today was actually mine and the mistress's 6th wedding anniversary. I froze as the words sank in, repeating the phrase 6th wedding anniversary in my head with utter disbelief. I dashed into the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. It was still my face, but the man looking back at me was far more mature in both appearance and aura than the 18-year-old I remembered. I started to panic, wondering if it was actually possible that I had married Olivia Miller and fathered 2 children with her. I raced upstairs to check the master bedroom, and then bolted into my father's old study to look around. I scanned both floors of the house in a frantic blur before finally heading back down to the living room. When I stood in front of Olivia, she could tell immediately from my pale face that I was in a state of total shock. I tried to speak, but it took a long time before I could force any sound out of my trembling throat. I told her that everything had changed and that the world looked nothing like it did during my junior year of high school. My eyes started to burn, and a thick layer of tears quickly blurred my vision. Olivia finally seemed to realize that something was seriously wrong with me and that I wasn't just pulling a prank. She cautiously asked what date I thought it was in my head. I immediately told her it was Christmas Eve and reminded her how she gave everyone in class a nice gift box except for me, who only got a single sour orange that tasted terrible. Olivia stood there in silence for a moment with a very complicated look in her eyes before telling me we should just eat dinner and talk later. It turned out that everything she said was true and we really were married. I hadn't traveled through time and I wasn't dreaming. I had simply lost a full decade of my memories. During dinner, I let my daughter Lily sit on my lap and asked her what she wanted to eat from the table. Every time she mentioned a dish, I made sure to put a generous serving onto her plate. Olivia's cold expression had finally softened, and I caught a small, faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I rolled my eyes at her and told her to stop smiling and just focus on her own food. Olivia clearly didn't like my tone because she immediately kicked me hard under the dinner table. I flared up and told her that she shouldn't think she can bully me just because I was raised not to hit women. Olivia didn't even bother to respond with words and simply delivered another sharp kick to my shin as her answer. The rest of the meal was incredibly frustrating since Olivia wouldn't stop launching sneak attacks on my legs under the table. By the time we were getting ready for bed, my mind was a complete jumble of confusion and anxiety. After all the years we spent as enemies, I never once imagined a day where I would be sharing a bed with her. Back in high school, she used to tell everyone how much she loathed me. She even went as far as to say that if I were the last man on the face of the earth, she still wouldn't marry me. As I was lost in these thoughts, the blanket beside me was lifted and Olivia slid right into the spot next to me. The faint scent of her perfume drifted toward me and made my entire body go rigid with tension. Mentally, I was still just an 18-year-old boy with raging hormones at a very sensitive age. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs as I tried to stay as still as possible. I slowly turned my head and met Olivia's captivating gaze, which made me swallow hard in a moment of weakness. She didn't say a word but quietly reached out and wrapped her arm around my waist from behind. I found myself whispering her name softly as I felt the warmth of her touch. She seemed to freeze for a moment, and after a few seconds of silence, I finally worked up the courage to ask the questions burning in my mind. I asked her how on earth we ended up together after a decade, when she used to swear she would rather be a nun than my wife. I really wanted to know what had made her change her mind so drastically. Olivia's voice held a hint of smugness as she told me that I was the one who had chased her relentlessly. She claimed that I had pestered her until she couldn't take it anymore and insisted that we be together. According to her, when she initially refused, I even went as far as to threaten to jump off a building, leaving her with no other choice. She sighed and said she simply had to agree to marry me under those circumstances. I gave her a look of pure disbelief and told her that sounded impossible since we were such bitter enemies back then. I argued that I never would have chased her unless she had been the one to start chasing me first. She asked me to explain where Leo and Lily came from then, sarcastically suggesting they hadn't just appeared out of thin air. I countered by saying that even if they were mine, she must have forced the situation on me. I reminded her how bossy and domineering she was in school and insisted that I was clearly the victim in this marriage. She laughed and asked if a guy who never admits defeat like me could ever really be forced into a marriage. I asked her if she truly didn't believe me, and she gave me a firm no. When she asked if I even remembered what had actually happened between us back then, I had to awkwardly admit that my memory was still a total blank. She told me that amnesia wasn't a shield and was just a convenient excuse for me to dodge my responsibilities. Olivia suddenly gripped my wrist tightly and warned me in a very harsh tone. She swore that if I ever cheated with another woman again, she would castrate me, promising that while she would never divorce me, she had no problem becoming a widow. After she finished her threat, she let go of my hand and turned around to sleep with her back toward me. I lay there beside her with my mind in a state of absolute chaos, feeling like I was walking a tightrope where one wrong move would be my end. I realized with a sense of dread that I really did have a naive mindset of an 18-year-old who knew nothing about how dangerous the real world could be. When I woke up the next morning, Olivia was already out of bed. I headed downstairs in my pajamas and found her having breakfast with our 2 children. I took a seat across from her, and the nanny served me a plate that contained nothing but a plain piece of poached chicken breast and 2 hard-boiled eggs. I was completely speechless and asked if this was actually supposed to count as a breakfast. I pointed out that I wasn't some kind of supermodel and didn't see the point in eating such a bland and tasteless meal. I had zero appetite, but since the kids were watching, I forced myself to pick at the food just to set a good example. Just then, my phone vibrated on the table, and when I checked my messages, my jaw nearly hit the floor. A woman saved in my contacts as Lexi Zoxo had sent me an incredibly provocative selfie. Her message said that she couldn't afford her rent and was about to be kicked out by her landlord, ending with a bunch of crying emojis and a plea for help. I started scrolling through her chat history to figure out exactly who this Lexi woman was and what her deal was. It looked like we had known each other for less than 4 months and had only gone on 5 actual dates. Every single time we met up, she seemed to have some heartbreaking story prepared just so she could ask me for something. One day, she claimed her phone was broken, so I dropped $1,000 to get her the newest iPhone. The next time, she said her dress was ruined, so I spent hundreds more on a replacement for her. She even convinced me that she lost her purse, so I would spend $5,000 on a designer bag, making me wonder if she just saw me as a walking ATM. I had to admit that Lexi was stunningly beautiful with a perfect body and flawless skin. I started thinking that if a small financial investment could lead to a big personal reward, maybe it wasn't such a bad deal after all. As I read through the flirty messages, a smirk crept onto my face while I realized that being an adult came with some pretty interesting perks. I was still grinning like an idiot at my screen when Olivia suddenly reached over and snatched the phone right out of my hand with a cold expression. She tapped around on the screen for a moment before tossing the device back to me. When I looked at my contacts, Lexi's OXXO had been completely deleted and blocked. I demanded to know if she had seriously just deleted her, glaring at her for touching my personal contacts. Olivia waited until the nanny had taken the children out of the room before she addressed me with a cold stare. She asked me if I really thought it was appropriate to use the money she earned to support my side pieces. Before I could even think of comeback, Olivia had already slipped into her heels and thrown on her coat. She grabbed her car keys and stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind her. I sat there thinking that she was honestly the most difficult woman I had ever met. I eventually learned from the housekeeper that my father had passed away 4 years ago, and my mother had since remarried and moved away. It turned out that Olivia had been the one working herself to the bone to keep the Evans family business afloat all by herself. A whole decade had gone by, and everything was completely different, which sent a cold shiver down my spine. I paid a visit to my father's grave in the local cemetery, leaving some flowers and pouring out a glass of wine for him. Standing before his headstone, I made a silent vow that I would find a way to bring the Evans family back to its former glory. When Olivia got home from work that evening, I had managed to cook a huge meal for her all by myself. I had to admit that the presentation on the table was pretty disastrous, and the taste probably wasn't much better. However, I figured that it was the thought and the effort that really counted in a situation like this. Olivia took one look at the spread and simply asked what was wrong with me now before heading upstairs to our bedroom. I quietly followed her up and shut the door behind us before pulling her into a sudden embrace. I leaned in and gave her a loud, wet kiss right on her cheek before she could react. Olivia's face turned bright red all the way to her ears as she frantically pushed me away and threatened to call the police. I reminded her that we were legally married, so she couldn't exactly report me for that. She shot back that while we were legally registered, it didn't give me the right to touch her against her will. I teased her by asking how I was going against her will when she was clearly the one seducing me. I joked that she wouldn't even be able to find any evidence if we ended up in a courtroom over it. Olivia grit her teeth in frustration and told me that I was being absolutely shameless. I let a mischievous grin spread across my face and told her that if she felt cheated, she was more than welcome to kiss me back twice as hard. I told her that I wouldn't mind at all if she wanted to get even that way. Olivia was so angry that she actually started stomping her foot on the floor in frustration. She called me a disgusting pig and said she might as well just die, so my wish of her becoming a widow could finally come true. She was so furious she looked like she was about to explode, and when she raised her hand to hit me, I caught her wrist. With a quick pull, she lost her balance and stumbled right back into my arms. As our eyes met in that moment, I had to admit that Olivia Miller really deserved a reputation as the high school queen bee. Looking at her beautiful face from such a close distance made my heart skip a beat completely against my will. I finally understood why everyone had been so obsessed with her back then. Even when she was being cold and distant, she was still adorable, but her current mix of anger and embarrassment was even better. I just stood there quietly watching her until she furrowed her brow and told me she was way too busy with work for my nonsense. She claimed she didn't have a single second to waste on my games. Her cheeks were still flushed with color as she shook off my hand and walked over to the closet to grab a pink silk robe. Later that evening during dinner, I sat next to her and watched her eat for a while. I finally broke the silence and asked her how the family business was doing these days. Olivia set her knife and fork down and shot me a look of pure annoyance, asking if we could please avoid such depressing topics while she was trying to eat. I ignored her tone and told her that I was going to help her run the company from now on. I promised her that she wouldn't have to carry the entire burden on her shoulders anymore. Instead of showing any gratitude for my offer, Olivia just rolled her eyes at me with total disdain. She told me that I should focus on cleaning up my messy romantic life before trying to help with business. She pointed out that my various scandals were basically paying the salaries of every paparazzi in town at this point. I hesitated for a second and reminded her that she had already deleted Lexi Zoxo from my phone. Olivia just pursed her lips and told me that Lexi was only the tip of the iceberg. I took a sharp breath, realizing that I seriously needed to re-evaluate exactly what kind of man I had become during those missing 10 years. My grades in high school were admittedly terrible, but at least I was born into a very wealthy family. Before my father passed away, he had left me a massive estate and officially named me as his sole heir. I had all the resources in the world, even if I didn't have the best academic record. The shares I held in the Evans Group alone were worth hundreds of millions of dollars. To all the gold diggers in the city, I was nothing more than a walking ATM that they were all desperate to get a piece of. It made me realize why my life was apparently so full of drama and scandals. Being young and impulsive made it easy to see why I was constantly surrounded by the wrong kind of women. It was honestly no surprise that my name was always in the tabloids for one reason or another. Olivia glanced down at her phone and let out a soft, tired sigh that caught my attention. I asked her what was wrong this time, and she frowned as she explained the situation. Apparently, the Miller Group was holding their annual gala tomorrow, and they had sent her an official invitation. I told her that she should just go if she felt like it, or stay home if she didn't, since it didn't seem like something worth stressing over. She worried that if she didn't show up, they would start gossiping about her being too arrogant to associate with her own family business. I told her she should definitely go then, just to shut everyone up and stop the rumors. She looked at me hesitantly and asked if I would be willing to go to the event with her. I didn't really have any desire to make a public appearance, but then I remembered how greedy and money-hungry the Miller family could be. I started feeling a little worried about leaving her to deal with them alone. I finally agreed to go, telling her that since I was her husband, it was only right that I accompanied her to the gala. The next day, I accompanied Olivia to the Miller Group's big annual gala. The moment she walked into the ballroom with her arm linked through mine, every single person in the room turned to stare at us. The expressions on their faces were absolutely priceless and full of suppressed shock. I heard people whispering and asking why Olivia would ever bother bringing me to an event like this. One woman commented that it made sense because if she didn't keep me on a short leash, I would just be out getting into trouble again. Others were talking about how impressive it was that Olivia had managed to secure such a huge portion of the Evans family fortune for herself. Another guest remarked that it was perfectly normal for a man of my status to have other women on the side and wondered why she acted like such a controlling wife. Her friend agreed, saying that Olivia was always so hostile toward other women and clearly thought she was better than everyone else. They went on to say that she had essentially married up into the Evans family and shouldn't have any right to interfere with my private life. Although they weren't shouting, they weren't exactly trying to whisper either, so I heard every single insulting word they said. It was obvious to me that they wanted us to hear their comments as a way to vent their jealousy and bias against her. I took a slow look around the ballroom, making a mental note of every single person who was talking behind her back. I felt a cold sense of amusement rising within me as I realized how petty these people really were. I finally understood why Olivia had been so reluctant to attend this family event in the first place. Nobody would want to be in a room full of people who were constantly making snide remarks about them. Olivia suddenly gave my arm a sharp pinch before letting go and walking out toward the pool area to get some fresh air. A few minutes later, a tall and stunningly beautiful woman in high heels approached her by the water. She told Olivia that her marriage to me was clearly a hollow shell of what it used to be. She suggested that if she were in Olivia's shoes, she would just get a divorce and finally have some peace of mind. Olivia let a confident smile play on her lips as she told the woman she was completely mistaken. She insisted that our relationship was actually doing quite well and that things were great between us. She told Lauren that if she was looking to interfere in our marriage, she would have to wait until her next lifetime. Lauren let out a mocking laugh and proposed a bet between the two of them. She asked Olivia who she thought I would jump in to save first if they both happened to fall into the swimming pool right now. Olivia's expression shifted slightly, and she fell silent as she considered the question. Lauren stepped even closer with a provocative look on her face and asked if she was too afraid to take the bet. She suggested that the loser of the wager should have to walk away from me forever. Olivia just shook her head and asked why she should bother betting when there was absolutely nothing for her to gain by winning. She told Lauren that if she wanted to make a fool of herself in front of the entire Miller family, that was her business and she should leave Olivia out of it. Lauren's face darkened for a split second before she forced another fake smile back on her face. Just as Olivia turned away thinking the conversation was over, Lauren moved behind her and gave her a violent shove. There was a loud splash as Olivia was knocked into the deep end of the pool and began to sink. Immediately after, Lauren jumped into the water herself and began to thrash around wildly. She started screaming at the top of her lungs for someone to help her because she supposedly didn't know how to swim. The area around the pool instantly erupted into chaos as people started screaming in panic. It was late autumn, and while the water wasn't frozen solid, it was definitely way too cold for a swim. I looked over and saw Olivia struggling desperately to stay afloat, her face twisted in absolute terror. I didn't waste a single second as I sprinted toward the edge and dove straight into the frigid water. I used every bit of strength I had to drag Olivia back to the safety of the pool deck, but she was already unconscious. I immediately began performing CPR, frantically pressing on her chest and giving her rescue breaths to try and save her. Olivia suddenly convulsed and coughed up a huge amount of water right into my face, which made me let out a massive sigh of relief. I told her that she had scared the absolute life out of me as I wiped my eyes. Lauren was standing nearby, wrapped in a warm blanket, and her face went completely pale when she saw me giving Olivia mouth to mouth. She demanded to know why I had chosen to save Olivia first instead of coming to her rescue. I noticed that Lauren was undeniably beautiful with a stunning figure and a very powerful presence. She had a flashy and seductive look that was the complete opposite of Olivia's understated and cool elegance, but I couldn't find a single trace of her in my memories. I awkwardly asked her who she was, which only made her stare at me without offering any kind of explanation. I could see that her eyes were filled with a mixture of intense rage and deep disappointment. The crowd around us started whispering, with some people mentioning that she looked incredibly familiar to them. One man told his friend to open his eyes because the woman was actually the famous movie star Lauren Vance, a recent Oscar winner. He mentioned that she was a VIP guest for the Miller Group and rumored to be my secret mistress. Several people gasped and started asking if that could possibly be true. Another observer said it definitely looked like the rumors were true and lamented that such a beautiful woman was being wasted on a man like me. A guy standing next to him joked that if he had as much money as I did, he would probably have even more mistresses than me. Despite her pale face and exhaustion, Olivia managed to push herself up into a sitting position. She looked over at Lauren and let a cold smirk cross her lips as she spoke. She told Miss Vance that since she was a major celebrity, it probably wouldn't look very good for her reputation if word got out that she was trying to break up a marriage. Lauren was so angry that she clenched her fists until her knuckles turned white. She turned all of her fury toward me and demanded to know what was going on in my head. She begged me to say something and asked if that woman had somehow drugged me or bewitched me into acting this way. I kept my expression neutral and chose to remain silent since I didn't know what to say. With my memories gone, I didn't even have the fact to defend anyone even if I wanted to. Besides, Olivia was the mother of my 2 children, and I knew I couldn't possibly take an outsider's side over hers in public. My silence only seemed to make Lauren more frantic and panicked, and she stared into my eyes with desperation. She reminded me that I was the one who told her we were soulmates, and that being with Olivia only brought me misery. She even claimed that I had told her the kids, Leo and Lily, were nothing more than a giant mistake. She alleged that when the Miller Group was on the verge of collapse, Olivia had drugged me so she could get pregnant and force me into marriage. She insisted that there was no real love between us and that the entire marriage was just a scheme to use my family's money to save her own. She added that I had even told her that despite being childhood friends, Olivia had always been in love with someone else. I felt like a bomb had gone off in my head when I heard that she supposedly loved another man. A cold sensation washed down my spine, and I started breaking out in a nervous sweat. I wondered if it was true that Olivia had simply used me for my wealth and never actually loved me at all. I stood there completely paralyzed as I tried to process the idea that our entire marriage was built on a financial lie. My mind went totally blank, and I couldn't think of a single thing to say. Olivia reached out and took a firm hold of my wrist as she turned to face Lauren with an unwavering gaze. She warned Miss Vance that she should be very careful with her words from now on. She told her that if she made any more attempts to drive a wedge between us, she wouldn't hesitate to file a lawsuit for defamation. Lauren asked if she was being threatened, but Olivia didn't back down for a second. She told her that if she really wanted to ruin her, she would have already leaked the details of her tax evasion to the media instead of talking to her. This revelation caught Lauren completely off guard and caused the color to drain from her face instantly. It was clear that she was terrified of having her dirty secrets exposed to the public and destroying her carefully crafted image. Lauren grabbed my other arm and urgently told me to divorce Olivia as soon as I realized the truth. She promised that she would be waiting for me before she turned and hurried away from the pool. I watched her leave with a head full of questions about who she actually was and why she was acting so crazy. As soon as Lauren was out of sight, Olivia snatched my phone again and began deleting every single trace of the woman's contact information. After all that public drama, there was absolutely no reason for us to stay at the gala any longer. She grabbed my arm and led me straight out of the building and toward the parking lot. As we sat in the car, I stole a glance at her profile, but the shadows made it impossible for me to read her expression. I was desperately hoping she would offer some kind of explanation for what Lauren had said, even if it was just a lie to make me feel better. The interior of the car was eerily quiet as we sat there in a long and heavy silence. Just as I was about to open my mouth and ask her what was going on, Olivia unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned toward me. She wrapped her arms tightly around my waist and buried her face against my chest. The car lights were off and the surrounding parking lot was completely silent. My heart was pounding so hard against my ribs that I thought it might actually burst right out of my chest. Olivia had dropped her tough exterior and spoke in a voice that was incredibly soft and vulnerable. She begged me not to leave her and whispered those words over and over again. It was almost impossible for me to imagine that the cold and untouchable Olivia Miller from high school could ever show such a weak side of herself. I was so nervous that I could barely swallow, and I managed to choke out a promise that I would stay. She seemed satisfied with my answer, and I caught a quick glimmer of a successful smile in her eyes before she pulled away. She got back into the driver's seat and started the engine to take us both home. Instead of clearing things up, she had only managed to leave me with more questions than I had before. I decided that I would have to find the answers to my questions on my own since she wasn't talking. Over the next few days, Olivia treated me with an incredible amount of kindness and attention. She made me breakfast every morning and even went as far as buying me a new Porsche and an expensive Patek Philippe watch. It was strange to see the once proud and arrogant campus queen going out of her way to please me like this. The more she tried to win me over with gifts and kindness, the more desperate I became to uncover the real truth. I felt a growing urgency to tear through the fog and see what she was really hiding. I ended up hiring a private investigator to keep an eye on her, and he reported back to me after a few days. He told me that Olivia went to a specific apartment every single day immediately after leaving her office. She would spend at least half an hour inside that building before finally heading back to our house. I couldn't stop wondering what she could possibly be keeping in that apartment or who she might be meeting there in secret. I kept thinking about what Lauren had said at the gala regarding Olivia being in love with another man. The thought of her having a secret lover made my chest tighten with a strange and painful jealousy. Every time that thought crossed my mind, I felt a sharp and dull ache in the middle of my chest. I started to realize that maybe deep down I had been in love with her since we were kids, but was just too proud to admit it. Eventually, the private investigator sent the exact address of the apartment to my phone. I spent a long time debating whether I should actually go there or not, but I finally decided that I needed to see the truth for myself. I knew that no matter what I found, we couldn't continue our marriage if we were always going to be living in a state of mutual suspicion. I arrived at the apartment building and paid a sketchy locksmith a large amount of cash to get me inside. He picked the lock in just a few seconds and stepped aside to let me in. When I pushed the door open and looked inside, I was absolutely stunned by what I saw. The apartment was divided into 3 rooms, and each one was lined with several large storage shelves. Every single shelf was packed with men's clothing, ranging from basic t-shirts to heavy winter coats. I noticed immediately that every single item in the collection appeared to be old and clearly used. A strong smell of stale sweat and old fabric hung heavy in the air throughout the entire apartment. There were labels on each section of the shelving units, and I was confused to see they were marked by age ranges starting from 13 all the way up to 29. I walked over to one of the shelves and picked up a random t-shirt, freezing the moment the fabric touched my skin. A powerful sense of familiarity washed over me as I looked at the design. I realized that this was the exact shirt I used to wear all the time during my junior year of high school. I had a very clear memory of finishing a basketball game and being so hot that I stripped off the shirt and handed it to Olivia to wash for me. I remembered how her face had turned bright red before she started screaming at me and calling me every name in the book. She had bought me a brand new shirt a few days later and claimed that she had thrown the old one in the trash because it smelled so bad. Looking at the shirt now, I realized that the item she claimed to have destroyed was sitting right here in this secret apartment. I couldn't understand what Olivia was trying to achieve with all of this. I picked up another garment from the shelf and confirmed that it was also an old piece of my clothing. As I walked slowly down the rows of shelves, every item I touched seemed to trigger a different memory from my past. After I finished looking through all the rooms, I was absolutely certain that every single piece of clothing in the apartment belonged to me. Everything here was something I had personally worn or used at some point in my life. It was incredibly difficult for me to wrap my head around why she would keep all of this. I wonder if the legendary Ice Queen Olivia Miller really came here every single day just to stare at a bunch of my old, smelly clothes for half an hour. I started to think that she might have some kind of secret obsession with my belongings and treated these old rags like they were sacred treasures. I realized that if she kept all this, the man she actually loved must have been me all along. Looking back on all the time we spent together from elementary school through graduation, we were the perfect example of a love-hate relationship. On the surface, we were always at each other's throats, but deep down, we were both completely obsessed with one another. Lauren had insisted that Olivia only married me to save the Miller family business. However, she was ignoring the obvious fact that Olivia was now the powerful CEO of the Evans Group and didn't need me for money anymore. If that was her only goal, there was no reason for her to still be married to me. With hundreds of millions of dollars under her control, she could have easily found her true love and lived happily ever after whenever she wanted. Once I realized that all of my previous doubts and suspicions about her felt like a ridiculous and poorly timed joke. I was standing there holding my old basketball shirt and grinning like an idiot when I felt a sudden, sharp pain in the back of my head. Everything went black instantly as I lost consciousness and fell to the floor. When I finally opened my eyes again, I was still in the apartment, but my hands and feet were bound tightly with thick rope. Olivia was standing right in front of me, wearing black stockings, a mini skirt, and her signature high heels with a sly smile on her face. There was a hint of wild, uncontrolled madness in that smile that was completely different from the dignified and cold image she usually projected. She slowly knelt down in front of me and used her fingertips to tilt my chin upward, so I had a look at her. She whispered that things would have been so much better if I hadn't come here today and discovered her secret. She told me that if I hadn't found the clothes, she could have continued to stay by my side forever without any problems. I let a mocking and playful smirk cross my face before I flexed my muscles and easily snapped through the ropes binding me. I reached out and grabbed Olivia's wrist before she could move, pulling her directly into a tight embrace against my chest. Olivia's face turned as red as a ripe tomato in an instant, and I could hear her breathing become shallow and erratic. She stammered out a question asking me what I was doing and warned me that she would call the police if I tried anything funny. I laughed and told her that if she really wanted to call the cops, she wouldn't have tied the ropes so loosely in the first place. I teased her for acting so innocent and asked if this game of hers was exactly how we ended up having Leo and Lily. Olivia's face was so red it looked like it might actually start bleeding as she asked me how I could possibly know that. I tightened my grip around her waist and leaned in to give her earlobe a gentle nip. I told her it was because I finally remembered every single detail, Mrs. Evans, and then I asked her exactly how she thought I should punish her for everything. Olivia puffed out her cheeks and complained that I was cheating and that this didn't count at all. She continued to mutter under her breath about how unfair I was being as I held her close. Liam wakes up from a 10-year memory gap to find his high school rival. Olivia is now his wife and the mother of his children. While struggling to reconcile his teenage mindset with his scandalous adult life, he discovers a secret apartment where Olivia has obsessively preserved his belongings for nearly 2 decades. This revelation of her hidden, lifelong devotion triggers his lost memories, leading Liam to realize that their fierce rivalry was always a facade for a complex, profound love, ultimately reuniting them in an intense and undeniable bond.